Although a good number of evidences were already available pointing to Jesus as the promised Messiah, his genealogy, the prophetic portrayal of his appearance and birth, his deity, his nature and ministry, the forerunner that was to go before him, his words and deeds, Jewish people continued coming to Jesus asking for more signs to verify that he was the Messiah. Jesus declared that those continually craving and obsessed with signs were evil and refused to provide any more except the sign of Jonah. As rabbinic scholar Alfred Edersheim has explained, imaginative speculation among the rabbis had so distorted the prophetic picture of the Messiah's first coming that many first-century Jews were not able to accept Jesus as their promised Messiah, while those who did accept him had a lot of rethinking to do. This was not the first time this had happened in Israel. As Judah's well-deserved Babylonian exile approached, the prophets Jeremiah and Ezekiel were trying to tell the people of Judah what was coming, 70 years of exile. But Jerusalem was filled with very popular false prophets who were telling Jews what they wanted to hear, that they would not go into exile, but that Babylon would soon fall. These rascals were not giving the people God's truth about what was coming, but a vision of their own imagination, prophecy from their own inspiration, and following their own spirit. The ultimate test for prediction is fulfillment, and over the centuries, a lot of self-anointed prophets have failed that test. So we should probably expect a good deal of confusion and false expectations concerning the Messiah's second coming also. From the later 2nd century onward, there have been theological ambulance chasers who claim to identify biblical prophecy and signs indicating the nearness of Christ's return in current events and important people. Montanus in the late 2nd century AD led what became a large movement, expecting Jesus would soon return and set up an earthly kingdom in Asia Minor. Between 1649 and 1660, English Fifth Monarchy men decided that Oliver Cromwell was the Antichrist, and they planned to capture the English throne so Jesus could return and rule the world. To protect the papacy from Protestant attacks, 16th century Catholic scholars Robert Bellarmine and Francisco Ribera, and Lacunza later, declared that everything associated with Antichrist, the man of lawlessness, tribulation, and so on, had nothing to do with the current age and papacy, but referred to events just before Jesus returns, and Israel would be restored to their land. These ideas were adopted into Protestant circles around 1800 through Edward Irving and J.N. Darby, who provided the foundations for what would later be called dispensational premillennialism. At the end, Israel will be restored to their land. Jesus would secretly return for Christians before the Great Tribulation, and then a single evil leader, Antichrist or the man of lawlessness, would create trouble before Jesus returns in glory to begin ruling an earthly kingdom. Mormonism began with false prophecy, as Joseph Smith claimed in 1832 a revelation of Jesus Christ, and thus saith the Lord, that a temple would be built in western Missouri and dedicated by his own hand within his lifetime, and that what became the American Civil War would develop into a world war, neither of which happened. During the 1830s, William Miller preached in some of the largest churches along the East Coast, promoting his Adventist or Second Coming calculation that Jesus would return October 22, 1843. When that date passed, Miller adjusted his calculation to include the rest of that year. But when Jesus failed to return by the end of 1844, he faded from the picture, and the movement was taken over by others who concluded that Jesus had not returned because God was upset that Christians were not keeping the Mosaic Sabbaths and food laws. So, retaining the end times emphasis, the focus was placed on Sabbath keeping, by which they became the Seventh-day Adventists. Charles T. Russell declared that Jesus had returned invisibly in 1874, and 40 years later the Battle of Armageddon would occur and the millennium would begin. World War I began in 1914, but it certainly did not lead into the millennium as predicted, which left Russell confused. After his death, the next leader selected a new name for the group, Jehovah's Witnesses. Between 1850 and 1920, Darby's views were developed and promoted by C.I. Scofield and Clarence Larkin, with the Niagara Bible Conferences telling people to expect Jesus' return around 1900. In the early 1970s, Detroit-based Jack Van Impe told 2,000 people in Lansing, Michigan that he was sure that all of the signs indicated Jesus would return by 1976. During the 1970s, Hal Lindsey's very popular The Late Great Planet Earth encouraged people, and I was one of them, to believe that Israel's national rebirth in 1948 began the final 40-year generation. Thus, the rapture would occur in 1981, then 7 years of tribulation, and the Battle of Armageddon would end with Jesus' glorious return in 1988. Between 1974 and 1991, books were published suggesting that Gorbachev, Henry Kissinger, and Saddam Hussein might be key figures in how things would end. After Hal Lindsey's timetable failed to produce Jesus' return, the same story was revived with Tim LaHaye's Left Behind books, published between 1995 and 2007. Harold Camping told his followers to expect Jesus' return on May 21, 2011. But the years roll by, every movement comes to nothing, and few remember how often, over the centuries, this approach has sounded so confident and turned out to be oh so wrong. P.T. Barnum may have been right that there's a sucker born every minute, but misguided prophecy experts have been able to fool large groups of people with the same old stuff, generation after generation. After giving the matter a good deal of thought, I've concluded that if the Bible really does provide a list of signs leading up to the second coming of Jesus, then two things should be true. First, Jesus should have actually shown up. However, each sign seeker during the last 1800 years has been wrong, and Jesus has not returned in connection with the signs they so confidently portrayed as identifying the time of his return. Their followers wind up disappointed and confused, and outsiders have one more reason to think Christianity is a bunch of foolishness. Well, why hasn't Jesus returned on cue? Were the sign seekers all reading the Bible right, but God is unfaithful and messing with us? Or are these some of the false teachers we were warned about, who show up in sheep suits to deceive and mislead many? Second, if the Bible really does identify a list of signs leading up to the end, then wouldn't you expect all these great Bible scholar prophecy experts to have identical, or at least very similar lists about the same number of signs and the same items on each list? But they're not even close. Of course, if everyone had the same list, then it would be hard for the later experts to sell lots of paperback books, because the earlier experts would have already published the list. But for each current expert to cash in on the ignorance and gullibility of their audience, their list needs to be different from everybody else's. Especially concerning the end times, it appears that there is a financial incentive to be theologically inventive. How different are the lists of last-minute warning signs being offered? Well, a little time on the internet will give you a pretty good idea.
4 signs of the end times. 5 signs the end is near. 6 signs of the last days. Of course, 7 is a favorite number. 8 signs we are in the last days. 9 signs of the end times world, and Jesus' return. 10 signs of the end time world, and that tribulation is near. 11 signs of the end times, and reasons Jesus will return in our lifetime. 14 signs announcing Christ's return. 16 signs the return of Christ is near. 20 signs of the last days, and Christ's return. 25 signs of the end times, and Christ's return. 28 signs of the end times. 50 signs of the times, and the second coming. But for the next edition he found more, 65 signs. And the winner is, 88 reasons why the rapture will occur in 1988.
Well, now that we're in the third decade of the 21st century, and Hal Lindsey and Tim LaHaye's 1970s and 1990s books did not usher in what was expected, a new crop of prophecy experts are trying to tie Jesus' return to a fresh set of current events. Maybe the Antichrist is Obama, or Donald Trump, or Vladimir Putin, and maybe the signs of the times refer to COVID, and Ezekiel's Gog and Magog was a prediction of the current conflict in the Ukraine. Others on YouTube are tying the end to the Chinese threat, or Putin and North Korea. Maybe NASA claiming the sun will overheat, or maybe on one of the Jewish feasts, or King Charles. And the date setters are pushing for the world ending in 2023, or the rapture in September 2023, or a big sign in October, and then the 7-year tribulation from 2023 to 2030, or 2024 to 2031. Or if that doesn't occur, then maybe 2025 to 2032. Anyway, a whole new generation is being pumped up to get all agog about Gog and Magog. If you've ever wondered why many skeptics think Christians are a bunch of confused dummies, this might be a good place to start. There are some good reasons to think that there are no last-minute warning signs before Jesus returns, and the wide disparity between lists and Jesus' failure to return in connection with any of them suggests that all of these alleged experts are offering their own imaginative speculations rather than biblical truth. A very old problem is determining who you should listen to. When self-anointed prophecy experts claim to have discovered the date of Jesus' return, and then they turn out to be wrong, we should not be surprised, for Jesus told his disciples that nobody, not even him, knew or would know when the end would come until it happens. So be ready and stay ready, because you do not know which day it will be. I remember listening to a big-name famous preacher present a sermon entitled The Signs of the Coming Kingdom, and it was the same kind of current events list everyone else has offered. But after 60 years, Jesus has still not returned. But I'm not surprised, because Jesus told his disciples that his kingdom was not coming with observable signs. I would suggest trusting the writings associated with Moses, the prophets, Jesus, and his apostles. And if even sincere and well-meaning popular preachers, no matter how big their churches or how numerous their followers are, do not speak in harmony with Scripture, do not follow them. Remember, Jesus said that false prophets and what they are selling tends to be very popular, because they tell people what they want to hear, while true prophets tend to be insulted, spoken against, persecuted, and rejected.